covering their tracks. They mocked the dead.
We're gonna get outside.
I think this proverb of the glass half empty or half full is an important one. In 1915, at the time of the genocide, the glass was shattered and thrown to the ground. But you rebuilt that glass carefully, painstakingly, and have been filling it gradually in those countries where you have come. And so many of you, in the early hours of April 2nd, that glass was struck. But, Bari Bakhtabar, it was a strong glass. It is a crystal glass, fine and yet strong. And what all of us heard coming from Artsakh, that you hear, is struck. All Americans, all Armenians and friends of Armenians heard that particular frequency. Now, what does it mean when a crystal glass is struck? It means pay attention carefully. And I think the moment we face today is one of those moments we have to pay very careful attention. And on that thought anymore, I think you all have your own thoughts, but we need to pay close attention. It's a moment of great danger. I think it's also a moment of great opportunity. So let's pray that next year, when we come together in April, we will have a glass, a crystal glass, that is more full. Thank you very much. All the best.
Be with you, and Mr. Mayor, if I knew you were going to say such nice things about me, I would have asked them to extend your time. But I feel very blessed to live in a city with such an extraordinary mayor, and the feeling is very mutual. By the Ottoman Empire began. For the last 20 years, I have sat with survivors of the genocide, your family, my neighbors, men and women, their numbers dwindling year after year, and heard them recall the destruction of their lives and their families and all they had known. As children, they were forced from their homes and saw their families beaten, raped, and murdered. They fled across continents and oceans to build new lives in our nation. And for their descendants, using the word genocide is sacred because it means the world understands what happened to them and will never forget. To deny genocide, on the other hand, is profane. It is, in the words of Elie Wiesel, a double killing. This April 24th was the final opportunity for the President to speak plainly about the genocide, to meet the commitment he made, but to the American people. That he did not is a grave disappointment. Remaining silent in an effort to curry favor with Turkey is as morally indefensible as it will be ineffectual. How many administrations must be intimidated into silence before we realize it never changes Turkish behavior for the better and only emboldens their increasingly authoritarian regime? That Turkey will do exactly as it has always done in its relations with the United States, and that is whatever Turkey believes to be in its self-interest. Many of our European allies and world leaders, including Pope Francis, have recognized the genocide, yet they have continued to work with Turkey because that has been in Turkey's interest. The same will be true for the United States. Recognition of the Armenian Genocide could have been a proud part of the President's legacy. Instead, this decision will be just in the struggle to prevent genocide by exposing genocide and its perpetrators. Today, a Christian people once again faces genocide, this time at the hands of a terrorist scourge in Syria. Among these Christians are many Armenians, including some who are the very descendants of those who perished at the hands of the Ottomans. And once again, Turkey has aided and abetted their destruction by failing to close its borders to foreign fighters, oil, and money. And farther north in the rugged lands of Artsakh, where an Armenian people struggle for the right of self-determination, for the right to live their lives in peace and take matters into their own hands, we should let them know that we are prepared to act too by acknowledging the independence and sovereignty of Artsakh. And we should tell the Turks that they must recognize the genocide just as we must, for history will not be denied. And once and for all, they must shut down the Syrian border to terrorist traffic. It is enough. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks the 101st anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. Let it also mark the day that the United States once again found its voice, because there can be no true alliance based on a coerced silence. Thank you, and God bless.
We're also gathered at an especially important time for our nation. And it's such an honor to be able to be here today with great friends and champions like our extraordinary Mayor, Eric Garcetti, like our greatest congressional hero, Adam Schiff, like a hero to all nations who care about truth, Ambassador John Evans. And it's especially important that we're gathered together today because these are in many ways when it comes to genocide recognition and those who would deny it. We've seen in the last week or so a campaign of Turkish denial that has reached absurd and disgusting heights. Just in the last week, we've seen skywriters over the city of New York spreading Turkish propaganda messages. We've seen full-page ads written in the Wall Street Journal. I'm very proud to have introduced a motion calling upon the city of Los Angeles to cancel all of its subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal just yesterday. We've seen billboards placed by the same denialists. We've even seen American youth dance teams being paid for by Turkish sources to wear Turkish flag t-shirts and do dance routines in New York and elsewhere. It's ridiculous because, friends, this is not just about genocide denial anymore. I believe that the campaign that we're seeing now is not so much about 1915. It's about distracting the world's attention from the crimes of today. The threats to Armenians and others in Syria. The threats that we see of atrocities committed by ISIS. Cultural heritage in our history with the desecration and destruction of cemeteries at Julfa, at churches, at Deir ez-Zor, and throughout the Middle East. And most importantly of all, I believe it's intended to distract our attention from the existential threat faced right now by the people of Artsakh. So, I say to my government, I'm sorry that once again us in recognizing the Armenian Genocide. I think that that is a shame as an American because it denies America's history as a beacon of hope and it denies our American values. But I say to them, if you don't have the strength or the courage to speak truth about what happened in 1915, at least have the courage to speak truth about what is happening right now. In 20, we are if you, the most powerful government in the history of the world, if you are too weak or too intimidated to risk offending a Turkish president who disrespects America, who supports and enables ISIS murderers, then at least follow in the proud tradition of American leaders who came to the aid of Armenians in 1915 who were facing destruction. Come to our aid. Come to help the Armenians who are today facing destruction by the same forces of evil. Artsakh must be America's cause. When we see what the Artsakhis have stood up for, when we see the courage that they've demonstrated, we have to see them as the torchbearers who are continuing to carry the torch that was lit in the 18th century. When we think about the Boston Tea Party, we as Americans take great pride in the idea that a small band of heroes stood up against the mightiest empire on earth, and they had the courage to speak out about oppression that they were facing then. But when we think about the Boston Tea Party, we should equally think and take pride in those who stood up in Stepanakert and in Yerevan and faced down the tanks of the Soviet Union with fists in the air saying, Karabakh, Karabakh, Karabakh. When we as Americans take pride in the strength and the persistence of the American forces under George Washington, who in the winter of 1777 encamped in Valley Forge with no hope of even surviving that winter, but they continued to stay strong for their cause. When we think of those heroes as Americans, we should also take great pride in the heroes of Shushi, who climbed hand over hand up the cliffs from that gorge. When we hear this general here before us today, we should think of those heroes who died on that cliff in order to liberate Shushi and turn the course of Artsakh. And when we take pride in how the world take inspiration from, what was that if it wasn't the inspiration for those people in Artsakh who again had the courage to declare their independence from the Soviet Union, their independence from Azerbaijan, and continue to declare, just as our forefathers declared with their life, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, a commitment to that idea. And so, to my government, to the elected officials of my government, I ask you to join Assemblymember Nazarian and I and sign a letter, which you will be getting from us soon. Sign a letter to our president calling for a permanent peace respecting the boundaries of Artsakh. A permanent recognition by the United States of America of Artsakh as a free and independent and sovereign state. I ask you to join in calling for United States aid to the people of Artsakh and a permanent end to support for Azerbaijan. And one more thing, I ask President Obama and our government to investigate the atrocities and war crimes that we know have been committed yet again by the Azerbaijanis against Armenian people in that part of the world. But my friends, don't count on just the elected officials to get that done. The job of the people we elect. It is the job of the people who elect them. And that's you. So you need to come together and make these demands. We stand in unity here today. We need to stand in unity again tomorrow when we stand together at the Turkish consulate. And I ask all of you to join us at the Rally for Justice at 1 o'clock p.m. tomorrow at the Turkish consulate. You must show up justice for our cause, justice for our martyrs. But you must also demand action today. On Monday, when we're done with the end of the centennial year of the commemoration of the genocide, that's the time to begin work fighting for Artsakh. You need to do it, my friends. Almost 100 years ago, there were only a few still fighting against Turkish atrocities during the middle of the genocide. And they were surrounded, and like those American soldiers at Valley Forge, they had no hope of success either. They had no hope of survival, as they were surrounded at Sardarabad by forces much more powerful and much better armed than they. but the Armenians heard the bells of Etchmiadzin. Armenians everywhere, civilians, elderly people, shopkeepers, teachers, men, women, stood up and went to Sardarabad, went to the aid of the forces there, and saved the Armenian people from destruction. The moral of that story, and the moral that we have to remember now, is don't ever quit. We're all frustrated that our government is continuing to side with Turkey and not acknowledge. And remember that African Americans were enslaved in this country, their culture destroyed, their people murdered and raped. We fought a civil war in this country to free those slaves. And at that time, a great American named Harriet Tubman helped to lead some of those slaves out of bondage, breaking the chains of bondage and to freedom. And it wasn't for more than 100 years